Welcome to another episode, everyone. Buntry from Mob Piru introduced Suge Knight to the Mob Pirus. Buntry, just like Tupac Shakur and Orlando Anderson, ended up being shot dead at the age of 35. He was at the MGM casino on that fateful night with Tupac Shakur. Reportedly, he got involved in the stump down / beat down of Orlando Anderson. Mob James is Buntry's brother, and he's the one that introduced Suge Knight to the Mob Pirus.
If I wouldn't have brought my brother to death row, I wouldn't have put him in the situation. I tried to figure out what I could have did and he'd still be alive.
Who actually knew Buntry?
Yeah. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Buntry. What made him so thorough?
Anything Suge needed him to do on the G level, it wasn't no questions asked.
The evening of September 7th, 1996, inside the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, a Mob Piroo member named Trevin Lane spotted Orlando Anderson in the lobby.
Piroo member? Piru, that's how you spelling Piru. It's Piru, man, Mob Piru.
Within seconds, Tupac Shakur had thrown the first punch. Within minutes, the entire death row entourage had joined in, and the security cameras captured all of it. One of the men on that footage was named Alton McDonald. They called him Buntry.
Buntry was too close with Suge.
Not Buntry.
Buntry, and I'm not going to call him my brother, but Alton knew what he was getting himself into.
3 hours later, Tupac was shot 4 times from a white Cadillac on Flamingo Road. Buntry chased that car. A witness told Las Vegas Metro Police that someone in Buntry's vehicle exchanged gunfire with the white Cadillac as it fled. So who was Buntry, and what exactly did he see that night in Las Vegas?
I don't know who Buntry was.
Let's get into it. The Mob Piroo Bloods are rooted on the east side of Compton, a cluster of affiliated cliques running off Central Avenue that built a reputation as one of the dominant blood sets in the city by the late 1980s. They were not a street corner operation. They were organized, known, and connected in ways that extended far beyond their immediate blocks. Alton McDonald, Buntry, was born on February 5, 1966 in Compton. He came up Mob Piru from an early age, running those blocks off Central Avenue alongside his brother James. James McDonald would eventually earn the name Mob James, not just a member of the set, but one of its most recognized figures, someone whose name carried real weight in South Los Angeles street politics, and who would become, in the early 1990s, one of the most feared enforcers in Compton. According to James McDonald, he had known Suge Knight since they were both teenagers, long before Death Row Records existed, long before Suge had any relationship to the music industry.
Now, you and Suge knew each other since you guys were teenagers.
Yeah.
I guess you met in high school?
Well, no, I've been knowing Suge in the neighborhood.
James did security for Suge during those early years, before there was a label to protect, before there were artists or revenue. It was a friendship built in the same Compton neighborhoods that the MOB ran through. And it was James who brought Suge into the Mob Piroo network. He introduced him to his brother Alton. He handed Suge access to the street infrastructure that Death Row would be built around.
So during the time in high school, Suge wasn't gang affiliated at all?
No. And from doing that show that night in LA, we was doing shows all over the place, everywhere else. So that's how he got in the game.
The MOB had been doing security work.
And there you go. So Suge Knight, and it's pretty much a well-known fact, in the city, that Suge Knight is not an official member of the Bloods, meaning that he did not grow up a Blood member. If you did not grow up in that neighborhood and was banging it in high school, if you started banging in your 20s or whatever, you're not going to be considered a real member at the end of the day. So as Mob James said, he was with Suge in high school and all that. He was not a member. Only when Suge got Death Row, needed that protection. He knew individuals, knew Mob James, one of the individuals who was a heavy hitter from Mob Piru, connected with him, and then he started bringing him security. And that's how Suge really got connected with the Mob Pirus and started being considered a real blood member by certain individuals.
Long before Death Row gave it a formal structure, Mob James ran doors at clubs, handled protection at events across Compton and Los Angeles, and built a reputation as someone who could manage situations that most people wouldn't get near. That reputation, and the network behind it, was exactly what Suge needed. It was that same credibility and those same Mob Piru connections that made Buntry's role inside the label possible. Marion Suge Knight grew up in the Looters Park area on the east side of Compton and played football at Linwood High School and then at UNLV. He was physically imposing and had a well-documented pattern of using that physicality to handle disputes, pressing Vanilla Ice against a balcony in 1991 to recover songwriting credits for one of his clients, showing up in executives' offices with a group of men when negotiations weren't going his way. According to Mob James, Suge was never really a blood in the traditional sense. The street reputation he carried came directly from the MOB members around him.
Suge paid people to do certain things. Didn't make him a leader of the Mob Piru. So Suge Money was an influence for all of those guys and everybody to come in.
Mob Piru members would provide the muscle, concert security, label protection, and the physical presence that made Death Row feel different from any other record label in the country. Artists and managers who dealt with Death Row didn't just deal with executives in suits. They dealt with a room where Mob Piru bloods were standing behind Suge, and everyone in that room understood what that meant. The 1995 Source Awards made that dynamic visible to the entire country when Suge stood at the podium at Madison Square Garden and took direct shots at Sean Puffy Combs. If you don't want the executive producer all up in the videos, all up in the pictures, come to Death Row. He had Mob Piru members positioned in the audience.
Want to stay a star, don't have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the video, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
It wasn't just a speech, it was a demonstration. Suge could say what he said from that stage because of who was standing behind him. The whole industry understood that. In exchange for that muscle, Suge gave...
I'm not so sure that that's why Suge Knight made that infamous statement, because he knew that the Pirus were there with him, at the place. Suge Knight was pretty much unhinged, a bully, if you will. And I'm sure he'd have made that statement even if he was there by himself for the most part, because the East and West Coast beef was going on somewhat. It was beginning to simmer, and these individuals were going to say and do whatever they wanted to do wherever they were at. So I'm not so sure, but certainly his protection had him doing things that he probably ordinarily would not have done. But these individuals that were protecting him were willing, of course, to do anything, to do his bidding. Anything that he wanted done, they would do, because he's rich and famous.
The MOB members closest to him something the streets couldn't: cars, houses, jewelry, and money. While associates outside the Death Row circle were still running corners, the MOB members inside the label were traveling to concerts, staying in hotel suites, and moving through the entertainment industry with resources they hadn't had before. Alton McDonald was not just a bodyguard or a street-facing associate. He was Death Row's production manager, the person who coordinated logistics for one of the most commercially successful labels in hip-hop, the label behind Dr. Dre's The Chronic in 1992, Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style in 1993, which sold 800,000 copies in its first week alone, and Tupac Shakur's All Eyes on Me, which had already moved 5 million copies by the fall of 1996.
Who actually knew Buntry?
Yeah. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Buntry. What made him so thorough?
Anything Suge needed him to do on the G level, it wasn't no questions asked.
The production manager role at Death Row in the mid-1990s meant handling logistics for one of the busiest recording operations in the country. Can-Am Recording Studios in Tarzana, California was the primary location. At various points in 1995 and 1996, Snoop Dogg and Tupac were recording simultaneously, often in adjacent rooms. Managing those sessions, Booking engineers, scheduling studio blocks, coordinating travel for producers flying in from across the country was Buntry's job. While Reggie Wright Jr. handled what happened outside the building, Buntry kept the inside running. Reggie Wright Jr. ran the formal security structure. Wright had started as a Compton police officer in 1990, formed Rightway Protective Services in May 1995 while still on the force, and took medical retirement from Compton PD on January 8, 1996 to go to work for Death Row full-time. But the Mob Piru network, the street infrastructure that gave the whole operation its foundation, ran through the McDonald brothers. Buntry coordinated production. Mob James handled enforcement. Between them, they represented the two sides of what made Death Row function. By September 1996, Tupac was recording 2 albums simultaneously at Can-Am Recording Studios in Tarzana, California. All eyes on me.
Yeah, man, they had a lot going on at that time. Death Row, of course, was blowing up, was booming. Tupac, it went to another stratosphere, and you hear Tupac mentioning Buntry's name often in his music. These individuals, they were all close and connected with Death Row and trying to take Death Row to another level. And these individuals had really risked their lives for Tupac. They were protecting Suge Knight and protecting Tupac, and pretty much willing to do anything to protect him. You see that Mob James, Buntry's brother, is sitting there crying early on, saying that had I not brought my brother to Death Row, that he'd still be alive. So however Buntry ends up dying, however he ends up getting killed and shot dead at the age of 35, Mob James believed that it was connected to Death Row.
Had dropped in February, and the Don Illuminati, the 7-day theory, was being recorded at the same time. And on September 7th, Alton McDonald was with the Entourage in Las Vegas. The Mike Tyson versus Bruce Seldon heavyweight title fight was scheduled that Saturday night at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Death Row had a block of tickets. Tupac, Suge, and the Entourage were there. Buntry was there. Mob James was there. Before the fight ended, a Mob Piru member named Trevon Lane recognized a man in the MGM Grand Lobby, Orlando Anderson, a Southside Compton Crip. Weeks earlier, at a mall in Lakewood, California, Anderson had allegedly stolen a Death Row medallion off a MOB member. Lane pointed him out to Tupac.
I went over there and started talking to my big homies and telling my big homies who that was. And Pac took off. I honestly believe that.
Tupac hit first. The Entourage piled on. Suge, Mob Piru members, production manager and all. The security cameras inside the MGM Grand captured Alton McDonald in the brawl. Las Vegas Metro Police were called. Anderson told them he didn't want to press charges and left. That same evening, Mob James was not inside the arena. He was in the parking lot of Club 662, the Las Vegas nightclub co-owned by Suge. From the lot, James spotted a white Cadillac that had pulled in briefly. The men inside were Southside Compton Crips. He called his brother immediately. Southside is up here, he told him. After the MGM brawl, the Death Row Entourage stopped at a friend's house in Las Vegas before making their way toward the club. Tupac was supposed to ride with his personal bodyguard, Frank Alexander. They had a disagreement that night, and Tupac ended up in Suge's BMW instead. Alexander rode in a black Range Rover trailing behind them, along with several other members of the Entourage. Tupac and Suge left for Club 662 around 11:05 p.m. in Suge's black BMW 750IL. On Flamingo Road, a vehicle attempted to pull alongside them. Suge ran a red light to get clear. Minutes later, at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, the white Cadillac caught up with them at a stop. The passenger window went down. Multiple shots tore through the right side of the BMW. Tupac took 4 rounds, twice in the chest, once in the right hand, once in the right thigh. A bullet fragment struck Suge in the head. He drove them to Desert Springs Hospital. Frank Alexander, in the Range Rover behind them, saw the shooting happen. He did not stop. He drove away from the scene. He later gave an account of what he witnessed to investigators. Alton McDonald did not wait at the scene. According to the documentary film Murder Rap, inside the Biggie and Tupac murders, Buntry got into a vehicle and chased the white Cadillac as it fled. A witness told Las Vegas Metro Police that someone in Buntry's car fired back at the Cadillac as it drove away. Las Vegas police recorded the account and incorporated it.
Yeah, even if someone did fire back at the Cadillac, it never should have happened like that. Tupac should have been with his security, should have had better security. No way. He needed to be protected. He was death row at the time, really. And it's just unbelievable that he was left out there like that. They have a 10-car or so entourage, and yet Tupac's car, along with Suge, is in the front of the entourage. So they can just easily get to them. He's supposed to be protected. His car should be in the middle somewhere with individuals protecting him inside of that car at all costs. As soon as that car pulls up shooting, all 10 cars are turning that thing into Swiss cheese. How they were able to just get to him like that and take his life is hard to understand.
Into their investigation. At Desert Springs Hospital, Suge was treated for the bullet fragment in his head and released the same night. Tupac was in critical condition. One of the bullets had struck his lung, and the fragments could not be safely removed. He underwent multiple surgeries over the next 6 days. Las Vegas Metro Police interviewed witnesses from the MGM Grand and from the street where the shooting occurred. Suge Knight did not cooperate with investigators. Tupac Shakur died at the University Medical Center in Las Vegas on September 13, 1996. He was 25 years old.
Rap star Tupac Shakur died last night after a brief life in a rough business. He was 25.
Orlando Anderson, the man beaten in the MGM Grand lobby hours before, remained the primary suspect for years, until Anderson was himself killed in a Compton shooting in May 1998. A man named Dwayne Keefe D. Davis was arrested in September 2023 and charged with Tupac's murder. His trial is currently set for August 10th, 2026. In February 1997, a California judge ruled that Suge Knight had violated his probation by participating in the MGM Grand beating. The security footage, the same footage that had Alton McDonald in it, was submitted as evidence. Suge was sentenced to 9 years in California State Prison. Dr. Dre had already walked away from death row in March 1996, months before Las Vegas, starting Aftermath Entertainment and taking his production catalog with him. With Tupac dead and Suge imprisoned, the label had nothing at its center. By early 1998, Master P visited Suge at California State Prison in Delano and negotiated a deal to release Snoop Dogg from his contract for a reported $3 to $4 million. Snoop signed to No Limit Records.
I met with Suge Knight and said, look, man, what you want for Snoop? Told me what it was. And I put an extra $200,000 or $300,000 on it.
Nate Dogg left. Corrupt left. The roster that had generated enough money to give Mob Piru members a life outside the streets was gone in under 18 months. In December 1997, Death Row filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, listing debts that included money owed to Dr. Dre and to Tupac's estate.
Tupac, bro, Tupac. And think about that. As rich as Death Row was, as rich as Death Row had become, as rich as Suge Knight had become. And Suge Knight, I always say, could have really been the first billionaire, from the ghetto, if you will, from the culture that had a record label and became a billionaire. Tupac could have been the first rapper that was a billionaire. No doubt in my mind about that. He would have been the first rapper that was a billionaire. He had so much more to give and so much further to go. And it was all cut short. Tupac ends up losing his life. Of course, Orlando Anderson did as well. But it's not only that, it's the fact that just a year later, in 1997, Suge Knight has to file for bankruptcy after Death Row was just thriving in 1996, the year before. Now, because of ill-advised decisions, he has to file for bankruptcy, then lost Tupac to death, and he's sitting in prison. We have to be careful with the decisions that we make. That was just a really fateful night that night when Tupac did what he did, when he jumped on the dude and everything that happened after that situation, man.
Scope distribution deal that had financed the label's peak was terminated. By 1998, Suge was running what remained of Death Row from a prison phone. The label that had generated enough money to pull Mob Piru members off the streets of Compton was now insolvent. The violence didn't stop at Buntry's level. Another Death Row associate named Aaron Heron Palmer, also on the MGM Grand security camera footage from September 7th, 1996, was shot and killed in Compton just 9 months after the Las Vegas shooting, in June 1997, he was sitting at a red light. Nobody was ever charged. The men who had been standing together inside the MGM Grand that night were getting picked off one by one. The Mob Piru members who had operated under death row's backing were now without that resource. And the Fruittown Piru, a separate blood set running off fruit-named streets on the south and west sides of Compton, Plum Street, Cherry Street, Apple Street, had also worked jobs for death row during its peak and was navigating the same vacuum. The two set.
I don't know anything about a Plum Street, Apple Street, or Cherry Street. I don't know anything about a Cherry Piru, Apple Piru, or Plum Piru, or Peach Piru. Fruittown Piru, yes. What the hell?
Had operated in a tense but functional proximity when Suge's money and influence kept everyone pointed in the same direction. Without that center, the proximity became a problem. By 2001 and into 2002, the Mob Piru and the Fruittown Piru were in a direct and escalating conflict. Members on both sides were being killed. On April 3, 2002, Alton McDonald was at a gas station in Compton. He was filling up his car. A pickup truck pulled up alongside him. The driver has been identified as George Williams, known on the streets as G or Ponytail, believed to be connected to the Fruittown Piru. Williams opened fire with a handgun. Buntry was hit multiple times in the chest. He died at the scene. He was 35 years old. The 5 years between death row's collapse and that gas station had not been quiet ones. After the label's bankruptcy and Suge's imprisonment, Buntry had returned to street-level activity in Compton, the structure that death row had.
Yeah, man, it ruined a lot of people's lives. Think about it. Buntry is there providing security for Suge Knight and everything else, everything under the sun. And clearly, he's getting money for this, right? A lot of money. Suge Knight is filthy rich, and Buntry is coming up. So is Mob James. And then when death row, goes by the wayside, they had to file for bankruptcy. Suge Knight's locked up. Tupac's gone. Snoop left. He has no more death row Buntry to fall on. He's getting no more money from death row. Now he takes back to the street on a lower level situation and gets himself caught up. And again, we hear Mob James here saying that he's really taking responsibility, it appears, for his brother being unalive, saying that had he not brought him to death row, this would not have happened. Even though I'm not exactly sure what death row had to do with it, because this was an enemy opposition situation, a gang. It sounds like a gang situation. They're saying they're enemies. Fruittown Piru is it's the individual who pulled up and unalived him 6 years after Tupac's death, years after death row had failed. So I'm not so sure of the connection there with death row and his death.
Built the formal roles, the institutional backing, the resources that had given the MOB a layer above the streets was gone. He was operating in the same Compton he had always known, in a city where the blood beef had now turned inward, and the people who had once been on the same paycheck were now on opposite sides.
If I wouldn't have brought my brother to death row, I wouldn't have put him in the situation. I tried to figure out what I could have did and he'd still be alive.
7 months later, in November 2002, a man named Terry Daniels.
Yeah, you can just feel the pain with Mob James. You can see the pain and feel the pain. He's taking responsibility for his brother not being in. That's hard. Anyone that has a sibling, a brother or a sister, man. You hear people say it all the time. It's hard when you have a sibling and you lose a sibling, man. Whoa. And then to feel like it's your fault that you're taking responsibility for it. That's tough. That hurts.
Was shot and killed. Daniels was believed to be a Fruittown Piru affiliate. Two men with connections to Suge Knight, David Rojas and Glenn Pulliam, were later charged in Daniels' death. The tit-for-tat killings continued through 2002, pulling in more members of Suge's inner circle, taking out several people who had been part of the same Mob Piru network that had been death row's street backbone for a decade. James McDonald eventually stepped away from the gang life in the years following his brother's death. He started a podcast called The Gangster Chronicles and gave long-form interviews about Compton, death row, and the men he grew up with. In one of those interviews, he spoke about what Buntry represented inside death row. Alton was one of the most loyal people you could find. He also spoke about what the gas station in Compton cost him personally, and about a night in Las Vegas when his brother chased a white Cadillac down Flamingo Road and didn't.
Wow, man. Rest in peace to Buntry. And you can see Mob James there crying again. I've seen a couple of his interviews, haven't covered any of his stuff. Maybe I will, though, to see what story he has to tell. I want to know how his brother's death, how Buntry's death is connected to death row. Why is he saying that had he not brought his brother to death row, then his brother essentially would still be alive when his brother died in 2002 at a gas station by, apparently, reportedly, allegedly, someone from an oppositional gang. So I'm not sure, but either way, he lost his life. He passed away, dead Buntry, or was murdered. And when you think about death row and all the characters on death row, all of their stories really end horrifically. Some of these other record labels as well. It's like we can't just get together, make our money, do right by one another, and flourish properly. Going to prison, people dying, going bankrupt. We have to do better. We have to make better decisions. You can't get these individuals back that have ended up losing their lives. Buntry is gone. He's gone forever. Tupac is gone. Orlando Anderson is gone. Suge Knight's in prison. No one wins in these situations right here. Rest in peace to Buntry. Knew a lot about that individual, had heard a lot about him, did not know him personally. Rest in peace to Tupac and Orlando Anderson as well. It's just sickening how some of these stories ends up ending and no one wins. Let me know what you think in the comments. Stay safe and stay free, people.